Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Citizens Climate Lobby University for this Thursday evening. Tonight, a really special presentation. This one is very close to a lot of CCL volunteers and our ability to drive the change that we want to drive, and it's using some of the Yale data that they've been collecting and that they've been estimating as far as our districts are concerned about American attitudes towards climate and climate policy. So tonight, on the call, we have CCL's own IT director, Tony Sirna, who's going to walk us through, how we can use it. And if you guys don't know about Tony is the person responsible for getting the Yale Climate Opinion data on the bios this year. So those have some data that we were able to directly use in DC, and Tony was integral in making that happen. Or actually was the person that made that happen. And then also on the line tonight, we have Bessie Schwarz from the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication. And she's going to walk us through the Yale data, opinion estimates, and what all this stuff means, and really help us as we try to leverage generating political will. Before we get started on that, let me just walk you through a couple of housekeeping notes here. If you guys are joining us by the phone, and suppose your audio drops out, there's a slide coming up right now real quick that will have a phone number on it. So just jot that phone number down, use it as backup, plug in the meeting code there. That's just if your computer audio drops. Don't worry, this lesson is being recorded tonight, and it will be uploaded to the CCLU page on community and also turned into a podcast. Should happen tomorrow. And if you'd like to mute and unmute yourself when we do stop for questions, you can press *1 on your phone, or click the little microphone symbol next to your name. And if you don't like asking questions live, you can type your questions into the chat window. That'll be fine. And then if you are online and you're hearing any type of feedback, feel free to put some headphones on or a headset. That will really help prevent the feedback there if you've got into one of those available. All right, so without any further ado, I am going to turn it over to Bessie Schwarz of the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication. And Bessie, if you would just start off, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. That would be awesome.
Yeah, sure thing. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep, we hear you great.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me on, Tony and Rick and the whole CCL team. We're huge fans of your work over at YPCCC. Think about you guys a lot when we're thinking through how our research is actually used on the ground. So just by a quick background or refresher about the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication and how I fit in, we're essentially a psychological research center at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies focused on climate change as a social and human problem with political, cultural, social solutions rather than a physical inevitability. So we look at what Americans believe, think, do, act, value around climate change, how different messages are received by different audiences, and how to move those different constituencies in America to take different action or persuade them in their work, while they're at home, while they're on the road, at the workplace, or at capitals. And I oversee our strategic partnerships and the practical application of that work. But really where that came from, I am, even though I'm hiding out here in academia, I'm actually a organizer at heart and by training. I got my start in work, and in the many years before I came to school was organizing in all over the country, so Florida, Oregon, Ohio, a variety of different types of things, and doing some 30,000-foot stuff in DC with Environment America, who you guys probably work with a little bit. So I'm excited to share with you sort of an organizer's take on the Yale Climate Opinion Maps, which hopefully some of you guys have gotten a chance to check out. I'm gonna just advance. How do I advance the slide? Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So what I hope to give you guys a peek into today, it'll be a short overview, but it's really just a refresher on climate change communication, what we know about what Americans think about climate change, how the Yale Climate Opinion Maps fits into that, and we'll actually take a peek at the web app, which you guys all have available, what it is under the hood, the big conclusions you can take from it, and how, so what the trends mean for the way Americans relate to this problem. I'm actually hoping to do this conversation in sort of two sections. So after that, I want to, we'll stop to see if there are any questions about the results themselves. And then we'll hop into the second section to look at how you can incorporate these local climate opinions into your campaign work at the ground, whether you're figuring out which county to work in order to target the governor, or you're just figuring out how to talk, how to do your messaging and your LTEs, or how to do door-to-door canvassing or petitioning, and what the right approach and frame is. And then we'll pause and ask some questions there. And as part of that, I think Tony will discuss some of the great work that you guys have, that CCL has done with the climate opinion maps already. And it's really some of the best examples of practical applications of the maps. So I just want to jump right in with the refresher, and we'll whip right through a couple of these things. Please feel free to ask questions during the question section, and then really hoping to continue the conversation after this to make sure we can arm you guys with the most data and insights that we know to maximize the work. So this is a complicated question. Climate change communication, if it was easy, we would be solved. We'd have a tax and dividend policy. But when looking through what is now a big wealth of information on what people think about this issue, where Americans stand, about, do you talk about it through renewable energy and jobs, you talk about it directly, we've boiled down the climate conversation, the sort of key messages around that, to 5 main points or 10 words. And I always start with this because I think it helps ground, no matter where you are trying to get someone to go or where a county to go, the general public there, you always want to make sure the conversation is around, it's real, it's us, it's bad, it's going to harm you, the values you care about, your family, the world we want to protect. Scientists agree. And I know you guys have focused a lot on the scientific consensus, which we know is a powerful message, and there's hope. So we can still stave off some of the worst, we can adapt, and we have the solutions now to tackle this challenge. And this 5th one is often, these numbers are always moving, and the 5th one in many places is the one that is sort of the most depressing when you look at. So these numbers go up and down. They have really were at their peak overall. They're slightly different, but with their peak in about 2007-08, were at about their lowest in 2009, 2010. It's a very interesting story about how this fluctuation is, and it's been coming back up ever since then. So we know that Americans don't think alike about climate change, and a lot of what we do at the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication is break Americans down into the 6 categories or 6 segments of the US in terms of our relationship with climate change. So there's no one particular category. We talk a lot about the polarization between Democrats and Republicans, between different other different groups, between young and old, but none of those actually accurately characterize climate change. There's really a much deeper worldview, demographic, geographic characteristics that go into these segmentations of how Americans relate to climate change. And you'll notice, I just sort of want to point out the alarmed right here. In many ways, this is what we are going for in the kinds of campaigns that you all are running. Oh, sorry, you might not be able to see my mouse. And what's critical about this point is that even if you are trying to mobilize someone who's not in the alarmed category, but a little bit farther down, we actually find that the disengaged share very similar values to the alarmed and are ready to kind of bump up to pass over some other categories and go right to be alarmed, but we have to reach these people where they're at. And this is a big key to organizing. And what you guys probably know from working in communities, whether you're in Texas or San Francisco. And so when we're thinking about how to use the maps, we want to think about the message that resonate with the types of folks we are trying to talk to in that particular county. So this here is just how the 6 Americas answer one particular question. So this is a typical question that we look at. What is going on with the gap between what scientists know is happening and human cause, and where the American public is at? The issue that we started looking at a couple of years ago was the fact that when we try to address this question, and really a lot of our polling and everything I've just shown is that we're conceiving of the US as one number. This is 48% Americans think that climate change is happening in human cause. That's almost 320 million Americans. The answer to that question actually looks more like this: a vast diversity across the US. So these are a bunch of pretty maps that we'll take a peek at in just a second, but it lets us do things like this. So now, just rather than just knowing this one overall number, we can understand that actually it's more evenly divided in Colorado, and yet in this one particular county in Colorado, that number looks very different. So let's explore some of these trends that are actually in the tool. I'm going to do a little song and dance. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So this is the Yale Climate Opinion Maps, and I think you can see the URL at the very top here, and we can share that around. You can also find it just by Googling it. So here we are at that same number. This is a compilation of many thousands of data points. And we basically wanted to understand what the local trends are. And this, for the first time, reveals the full geographic diversity of climate opinions. So just to give you guys a quick tour of this, we downscaled these national numbers based on a fairly complicated regression, but it essentially looks at the relationship of different demographic, geographic, behavioral, political, and a few other characteristics that are true at the national level, and then downscale them to these local levels based on sort of the demographic, political, social mix of what's going on in these different states, congressional districts, and counties. So you guys can play around with this a little bit. We did this for 14 different questions that we regularly ask over the past 7 years that we've been doing national level polling. To understand a little bit more about how the model was put together and then some of its important methodological limitations, you can check that out in some of the information that we provide in the app. So a couple of things that I just wanted to point out here that you'll notice immediately. I mean, first you see the vast differences, geographic variation, which I keep referring to because it's the first time that we can really see it at the national level. And what you're seeing here in many ways will confirm what you already know as an organizer, someone who's been working on this issue really hard. But there are important exceptions to probably to some of those rules or those instincts that you know, certainly to the national level trends that we've looked at. So for instance, I always like to look at Texas. So Texas is really seen as a fairly conservative state. But if you actually look at what's going on in it, I'm going to go to the worry question. You can see that there's actually a very stark divide between northern Texas and the border of Texas. I think this is particularly good on the congressional level district. I wish we could interact with you guys a little bit more, but this is probably not surprisingly because of the high Hispanic populations and or like around the border, particularly Mexican. We know that Hispanic Americans or Hispanics in America have higher levels of belief, higher levels of policy support, higher levels of worry than any other group, ethnic or otherwise group in the country, period. And that actually trend holds true internationally. We've done some global polling recently. So now let's take it. There's a bunch of other really fascinating trends. I'm sure we could spend a while sort of over beers looking at this. But now just going to sort of the question of the day. So we want to focus on if we want to focus on the carbon tax, you'll see this is split. You can see the scale over here at the 50 line, so it turns blue and under 50. And there are a few places or congressional districts in the country right now that are that have a majority that support this policy. You can see a couple of key exceptions popping up here. And these are in places where at least I wouldn't expect to have the most support around this. So the takeaway for me when I look at this question here in particular is that there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of really good work that we need CCL to be doing, and that there are surprising places where we might find the most support around doing that. So let me just pause there. We're about halfway through, and want to see if there are any questions about the how we did this, about the limitations, or just about the results in general.
All right, thanks, Bessie. If you guys have a question, please go ahead and *1 your phone to unmute yourself, or click the little microphone symbol next to your name. And like I said, if you have a question you want to type it in the chat window, you can as well. So who's got the first question for Bessie here?
Hey, Ricky, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine, Dave. Go ahead.
So I completely lost the slideshow. First of all, nothing was happening on the screen. And then, so this is a technical question that I don't know if we can even mess with, but I'm not seeing any slides or nothing anymore. I've even lost the screen. So, oh well.
Okay, Dave. Well, do you have a question? Do you have a question for Bessie, or is just do you just want to let us know about that?
No, I don't have a question. But I do have the maps up, and I'm hoping I can follow what you're saying with the maps.
Okay, and Dave, well, like I said, again, the call is being recorded, and so the recording will actually show what she was walking through. So if there's something wrong with your connection, you should be able to watch it tomorrow. It won't be that. Hopefully, it'll be able to catch up. Anyone else have a question for Bessie at this time?
Happy to move on since we're
okay.
We're running a minute behind anyway.
Okay, let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and move on then. Thanks, Bessie.
No problem. I think I'm going to go back to sharing the presentation.
I'll do that for you. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
There you go.
Okay. Wonderful. So these maps, whether you're looking at it on your computer or you look at it later, or you've been using them in your campaigns, are these just pretty maps, or why do we care about this? And specifically, I think for the sake of this conversation, a lot of what we care about is how do we leverage public opinion data to build political capital in your community or overall for the country if we're looking at a really big and important policy lift like what you guys are focusing on. So hopefully in the second half, I'm going to give you guys some tools or perspectives on how to dig into this question and how the maps can support some of the work that you're doing already. And again, that's going to be more giving you tools rather than prescriptions on what these particular trends mean for the community campaigning that you're doing. So with that, I'll go to this next slide, and I want to give a quick little example or a taste of how some folks have been using these maps already, but I think it would be most exciting to start with Tony and what CCL in particular has been doing to use these new insights.
Great, thanks, Bessie. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So CCL has been using these in a few different ways. When they first came out, we encouraged folks to use them in their letters to the editor or in putting together an op-ed. for their local paper. And so we had some success where people were able to, it made it a local interest story, something that was more appealing to your local newspaper, to be able to mention some local statistics on climate change. And that was, made it a more newsy and locally appealing article. So that then we were able to pivot from there into our, more standard, support for climate, for carbon fee and dividend. And then we also included data on from the Yale maps in each of the congressional bios that you used in DC if you were there for the conference this summer. And so for each of those, we pulled out 3 questions that we thought were the most important and gave you that information on a per district or per state basis. So you can see we chose the questions, is global warming happening? Is global warming caused by humans? And what the support was for carbon fee and dividends specifically. And so each of the bios had one of these graphs in it. So this is a graph for the state of Florida, whereas we also can see down into the district level for someone like Carlos Curbelo, one of the signers of the Gibson resolution, and you can see that there is significant support in their district. And I think the graphs are really important here because they show that sometimes the support for fee and dividend is not above 50%. It is still much higher than the no. So in this district, you can see there's a 47% support and a 21% against. And so that's really an important point. And using some interesting phrasing to remind, so when you're going in to talk to your legislators, you can say, that in a case like this, you could say something like, people support, fee and dividend 2 to 1 in your district, or that, that there's twice as many people supporting the policy as opposed to it. And, and acknowledging that there's still a lot of work for us to do and that these are based on models and estimates, but it can help you go into your meetings with congressional offices, knowing what your district is like, knowing, they know this too. They want to know what kind of support they're going to get in their district for various things. And so by informing them and educating them and supporting your congressional office, you can provide them the information they will need to feel confident in supporting action on climate and specifically fee and dividends. So those are the 2 main ways we've used the data so far. We're also looking at some ways to be able to find districts that are especially appealing to us in terms of there's a Republican office, but there's a high support for climate action. So we've loaded all of the data from the Yale Climate Maps into our database and are able to do some comparisons against where are there Republicans in office and where is there still support for climate action. So that's my quick spiel, and I'll get back to your slides here. And
that's fantastic, Tony. When we initially released these maps, and actually in the couple of months since then, we've gotten hundreds of stories written about it, and about half of those have actually been super local outlets that our data and really in-depth quality climate public opinion data has never really isn't covered as much at those local levels. So it's titles like 72% of Custerites support action on climate change, which was just a local county paper, or editorial boards that then wrote about support for climate and belief in climate in local small city papers like Boulder, Colorado. And those have been very powerful, and journalists have been very excited about, whether it's a paper that a story they're writing exclusively with these data, or as just helping to support another story that they're writing about a local oil field or a local solar facility. There are lots of ways to help journalists do their stories. So what I love about CCL is that many of the examples that I usually talk about for ways to apply these data come from you guys and are the ones that Tony just described. I think that a couple of creative ones that that Tony didn't mention. There's just so many that sort of now I'm like reeling through all of them, but figuring out how to push a federal climate bill in the long term. So this is a very big push, but looking at congressional districts where there is a potential to really run a hearts and minds campaign and not just do immediate grassroots work to get the most product and for the immediate policy, but to build up a strong capacity where a community looks like it's ready to be tipped over. So let me do the next slide. So as you're thinking, how might I be able to apply this for the state or the area that where I'm working? I just want to give a couple examples and then hopefully spark a few ideas of kinds of questions you can ask to put these into your campaign design. So the first thing is a common question. This is an example that we often ask ourselves when we're thinking about going into new communities. Should we be talking about carbon directly here, or should we be talking about a different frame just to enter into the conversation, no matter where we want to bring them in general? So you can just see that this is in Florida, and this particular county, the numbers didn't pop up here for some reason, but this is the lowest county in Florida. Florida is a very strange state, but the lowest county in Florida on whether climate change is happening and human caused. Oh, the animation didn't work here. Oh yeah, there it is. But then you can actually see that county is in the top, I think it's the top 40th percentile in terms of support for renewables. So there could be, and it's well above a majority of this particular county that supports funding renewable energy at the federal level. So there's lots of opportunity to enter into the conversation with this community around climate, or around renewables. Now, you don't want to do that everywhere. Really, it's just the way that you start the conversation in order to then bring them wherever you need them to go. So you meet someone where they're at, and then you know where you want them to go. But you've got to start at that place. So here's just another common question that you might want to ask yourself. So on the opposite end of things, let's say we're working in Arizona and we need to get the most people on our side for a particular action or particular ask right away. So often I find that the maps that you've seen or in the web version are the best for identifying trends or really standout outliers, really standout exceptions. When it comes to the point where you actually want to make a decision on a campaign, I find the tabular versions, and this is all available by download on the website, are really helpful for figuring out sort of where the rubber hits the road on that. It's great because you can see specific numbers here, so where that breakdown exactly is. You can compare across a couple of different variables. So there's, what is this, just 5 here, and you could look and sort between a couple of different counties. So you can, on this particular example, we have it stacked on the left-hand side. So this is ordered by the county that has the highest belief that global warming is happening down to the lowest. So this is just the top, I think, 15 counties. So if you're thinking, I want to go work in the place where I can get the most supporters right away, so maybe we'd pick the top 5, 6, 7 or so. But then if you look across a couple of other variables here, you'll notice that those numbers aren't necessarily consistent in terms of where you'd be most likely to find support. So you can even just see within those 5 or 6 of the top counties that think global warming is happening, it's not necessarily the counties that think it's happening, it's human caused. So the places that have the surprisingly low support in it, even if you just look at the third county here. The green, by the way, is above 50, the red is below, and yellow is right at 50. So you might want to pause if you were thinking to add this particular county, the third county down, into your category of places you're going to go all out and do a bunch of organizing. Likewise, you want to think about the converse, the opposition, of the reverse of the main question that you're asking. This is exactly what Tony was saying. So even if there's a high belief that global warming is happening, is there also a surprisingly high belief that global warming isn't happening? So you're likely to actually find a lot of opposition, even though you might find a lot of supporters, and that might want to be a place you want to avoid as well. Just because you could rile up a bunch of sort of nasty opposition that could be doing a lot to counteract with either in your lobby meetings or your letters to the editor. Great, so just an example there. So I wanted this, all these resources will be up, and I'm not going to belabor the point here, but there are a bunch of different ways that you can have these maps and other public opinion maps enter into the campaign decisions or the tactics as you're just trying to improve them to make them a little bit better. So you can see just with targeting, recruitment, so where's this audience now? With media, some of the examples that Tony and I have gone over in your lobby meetings, like you guys will be doing, I think in DC shortly, and how you talk about it, how you just frame your overall campaign. So these questions will be ones you would think to yourself as you are asking them. And I just want to note that you would never use these maps exclusively to answer any of these questions by any stretch of the imagination. You guys know as organizers and even just people living in the communities that you're trying to bring together around this issue, excuse me, have a wealth of knowledge about what people think around the issue, how people act around the issue. You have a wealth of knowledge around what the target thinks and the political lay of the land. And then other than that, you would want to think about your organizational resources, where you guys already have a bunch of existing CCL members, where you have good relationships with the targets, not to mention lots of demographic, political history, and there are tons and tons of resources out there. So just in conclusion, a couple of big takeaways for me. There are overall pockets of support that you might find surprising across the country for the particular policy that you're looking at. And as Tony mentioned, you want to think about both the support and then the I'm using the term opposition, but the sort of the opposite of support, and maybe that's particularly low, and that difference will could be the best indicator of an organizability of a county. You want to start when using these maps. You want to start always with the vision and goals and strategy of your campaign. You don't want to just dive into the maps. You want to take a step back and think, where do I want to go with my community, with my state? Where's CCL going overall? What are the goals of CCL? What are the goals of working in the state? What are the goals that I have with working in the particular counties or areas that I'm focusing on? And then what's my strategy for going all the way back up and hitting those things? And then how do the maps fit into that context? So what kinds of questions from the last slide should I be asking? So then when digging in and using the maps, you want to start first with the mapped version of it to find trends. And then you want to rely on the tables to make rubber hits the road decisions. And maybe the maps are sufficient to find trends, and maybe you're going to actually want to figure out what the top 5 places are out of the top 30 that look like they might be good on the maps. You want to use them when you're digging in and you're looking at any particular county across all these variables. You want to try to tell a story about that area that you're working in. What might this mean about how people think about climate change, about what they value about climate change, how they're acting now, or how they'd like to act? Are there people who probably want to get active on climate change? Are there a lot of alarmed, but not a lot of people taking action in my campaign? What's going on with that gap there? And you want to do that by looking across multiple variables and in conjunction with all the great stuff that you already know about that community. And then you want to use that to figure out where they're at and then where you want them to go. This is really going back to your particular goal. And then what's the best inroad to talk to them? So maybe it's around clean energy. Maybe they totally believe climate change is happening. They think it's human caused. They're ready to go, but they're just not that worried about it. At that point, you might skip all the scientific sort of information because they're already past that, and focus on how it's impacting them, their community, their values, and the things that they care about. So use the maps to try and whittle down. Again, it's not the only information, but it can help you answer these questions in a more informed way to make better decisions on your campaigns. So I know we're just running a couple of minutes over, but I just wanted to leave you with one number, 22 million. Based on our polling, there are 22 million Americans who say they want to take action to put pressure on their elected official to do something around climate change. 22 million Americans. There are movements built on far less. And yet we know that there's a gap. Even the amazing work at CCL is on the forefront of activating these 22 million people and has been expanding like crazy. We know there's a big gap between what we have on the team right now, in the movement right now, and what we know is out there. And we definitely don't have to reach the 22 million, all of them, but there's a lot of folks who we do need to join us if we're going to pass a tax and dividend. Great. So I don't know if we have time for questions. Maybe we'll just take a few, but I would be really curious about any questions you have on just what the information is, but I'm particularly excited about how you think you would use this campaign and what other data you would like to see us downscale, or whether other questions that we could be asking the public. So maybe just a few quick questions, Tony.
Yep. So if you guys would like to *1 your phone, or click the little microphone symbol next to your name. One question I had, Bessie, and maybe if you and Tony could just touch on this, explain again for us the difference between, estimates and the actual polling data, right? So these are climate opinion maps, and just make sure that we all have a good understanding of the difference between the two.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So one thing to be clear is these are not polls. These are not poll results. So we did not go out and do polls in each of the 50 states in the 3,000 plus counties. That would be really prohibitive. Needless to say, once we did it, it would all change. What a poll is, where you ask a representative sample of folks from the community you're interested in a question, and then you extrapolate based on a margin of error that's what everybody in that community thinks. In this case, we took trends that we know are happening at the national level and downscaled them. And that's what we mean by estimates. It's also within a margin of error, but it's not the same as a statistical margin of error. And those numbers are 5 points for the state level, 7 points at the congressional district, and 8 points at the county level. So we know that 95% certainty that the number we've presented you is within those numbers, within those margins. And then what this means in practice is that the limitations of this are that the maps, we don't know how locally responsive to environmental conditions it is. So we can't say that numbers are particularly high in the coastal areas of Florida because of sea level rise, or that higher levels of like worry about climate change or personal impact in New Jersey are because of Hurricane Sandy. A polling would be able to get to that because it's asking folks there, but these can't get that. And just one other thing to note about the accuracy of this, we did several tests to figure out how precise these data are, and that included doing actual polling to look at how closely aligned the polls and the maps are. And we actually, the maps are so accurate, we don't know which is truer, the polls or the maps, because they're within the margin of error of each other. I hope that answers your question.
Yep, absolutely. Anyone else with one? I guess we have time for one more question. If you'll *1 your phone, or click the microphone symbol next to your name. Well, doesn't look like we have any further questions. All right. Well,
Ricky.
Bessie. Oh yeah, go ahead, Dave. Good.
Yeah, Bessie, I got the slides back, but they weren't on when you made a comment that I have a question about. Did you make a reference to, for the different geographic subdivisions, besides the responses to those 11 questions or whatever they are, you also had data about how people feel about renewables and, some extra data to flesh out the picture. Did you say that?
Yeah, there's 14 questions that are in these maps. and they include beliefs, which we've been talking about a lot, concern, is it hurting me, is it going to hurt people in other countries, and policies, which include carbon regulation, includes tax and dividend, carbon tax and dividend, and includes 2 questions on renewable energy, federal support for federal funding, and I believe, support for kind of a renewable energy standard equivalent, like a 20%, just as an example. Yeah, so check it out. All that information's in there, and the exact question we used when we did the polling we pulled from our online.
Oh yeah, I see that's actually part of the main map, like funding research into renewable energy sources. That's one of your questions.
That's right.
Okay, got it, thanks.
Great.
Well, Bessie, this is Tony, and one other piece of data that I've asked you for is ways to break these kinds of questions down by income demographics, especially like what do the top 10% or the top 1% of income and wealth people, what are their opinions? Because I know that that's one of the big influencers on political change is what those at the top of the income brackets do. So that would be one thing to take back to folks at Yale and see if we can incorporate that into your data analysis.
Yeah, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about it with our team, and we thought about a couple of ways we could test that. We definitely asked, one of the issues, this is sort of a side note, maybe we don't ask we were looking at what the top 1% means, and it's very high, and we have just income, the high end bracket income is something like 150,000 and above. So we can look at what's generally rich, we think, but I think it wasn't as high as the paper that we've been looking at. But let me go back and remember how those conversations went.
Okay.
And Bessie, one other thing, this is Ricky again, one other thing we've heard from the past, I know from my folks here in Texas is, it'd be great if we could get that broken down by party, but I don't know how difficult that would be. Democrat, Republican, Independent.
You mean have each question broken down by party, or have look at party affiliation?
Yeah. Well, in particular, carbon fee and dividend, but all the others, if it's possible to break it down by party in the counties as well, or in the districts.
Oh, yes, that is possible. Because you want to look at places where there's particularly high support amongst Republicans.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we should talk about that offline. Yeah. I mean, I don't have an answer for you now, but if that's exciting, we should talk about it offline.
Well, I will buy you a big bottle of Jack Daniels if you do that.
If you guys,
All right, well, thanks so much for having me.
Was there one more question? I'm sorry.
If you guys can still hear me, I think looking at Democrats is important too, because there's the revenue neutrality question. And the way we're posing the policy is that the government would not keep any of the revenue. It would all go back to the public. And that could be an issue with Democrats as well.
Yep,
true.
Absolutely.
Very true.
Thanks, Dave. All right, well, thanks, Bessie. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy evening. I know you guys are busy up there working and providing all this wonderful data to us. It's just a pleasure to have a partnership with you guys. Not a partnership, but that working together on this important issue, and we really appreciate all that you guys are doing and have done for us. So thanks so much. And Tony, thanks for sharing how we can use this. And I'm sure if people have questions about bio data and things like that, they can get in touch with either you or myself, and we can help people go through that. All right. Thanks, everyone. You guys have a great evening, and we'll talk to you next week on CCLU. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.